You read the headlines right now, and the message is just incredibly uniform.
Oh, yeah, absolutely uniform.
Right. Like, we are basically being told that artificial intelligence is revolutionizing every single vertical overnight with just absolute certainty.
Yeah, and the press releases from the frontier labs, well, and the major enterprise vendors, too. I mean, they read less like software updates and more like, decrees of a new industrial age.
Exactly. Decrees. But then when you look at the actual balance sheets, the grid capacity reports, the internal memos, that narrative of frictionless adoption just kind of shatters.
It shatters completely, yeah.
So welcome to a deep dive into the reckoning between AI's headline promises and its actual, well, messy on-the-ground deliverability.
Because we are witnessing a classic phase transition right now.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the tech industry, and by extension, the broader economy, is trying to move from the announcement phase to the deployment phase.
Right, from telling us what it can do to actually making it do it.
Exactly. And historically, whether you're talking about, I don't know, the rollout of electrification, the early internet, or cloud computing, that deployment phase is incredibly painful.
Oh, for sure.
The underlying technology of AI is undeniably advancing rapidly. I mean, we all see that.
Yeah.
But the physical infrastructure, the corporate governance structures, and the actual business models required to support it, they're showing deep structural cracks.
And so our mission today is to take a massive stack of sources. I mean, we're looking at corporate spending reports, energy sector analyses, public sector pilot data, and geopolitical tech maneuvers, and really figure out what this friction actually means for you and your business.
Because the numbers we're seeing are, frankly, staggering.
They really are. They point to this massive disconnect between the boardroom mandate to, quote unquote, use AI and the reality of getting it to work.
Yeah, let's start with that piece of research from Amern.
Yes, the Amern data. So they estimate that large UK businesses are currently wasting roughly £67 billion a year on failed AI and digital transformation projects.
67 billion. It's just wild.
That is around 2.5% of the total annual revenue for major UK firms outside the financial sector.
I mean, it's a phenomenal amount of capital just vanishing.
Yeah, setting cash on fire.
But the scale of the capital destruction is remarkable. But the mechanism behind it is what we really need to understand here.
Okay, unpack that.
Well, when you dig into the Amern data, you realize this is not fundamentally a technology failure.
It's not.
No, it's not that the neural networks are suddenly breaking or the math stopped working. It is a failure of corporate governance.
Ah, okay.
The research highlights how deeply the sunk cost fallacy has embedded itself into these AI initiatives.
Like they've spent so much they can't quit?
Precisely. 27% of these firms are keeping failing, non-productive AI programs alive on life support purely because of the sheer volume of capital they've already poured into them.
Right, but I hear the argument that this is a governance issue. But surely some of that $67 billion is just the inevitable cost of research and development? No.
I mean, partly, sure.
Because if you are a legacy business trying to integrate bleeding-edge generative models, you're going to break some things. You can't innovate without burning capital on prototypes that ultimately don't scale.
Right, right.
Isn't this just the price of admission for a new tech cycle? Like you have to crack a few eggs?
Well, risk and failure are absolutely inherent to innovation. We know that.
Yeah.
But healthy R&D is characterized by calculated risk-taking and rapid iteration.
Okay.
You build a prototype, test it, realize it doesn't hit your key performance indicators, and you kill it. You document the learnings and move on.
Right. Fail fast.
Exactly. What this data reveals is a complete lack of that cancellation discipline. We are seeing a massive, what they call a candor gap inside these organizations.
Oh, candor gap, meaning people are lying.
Basically, yeah. 23% of staff actively admit they hide failing projects from leadership.
Oh, wow.
And a quarter of leaders acknowledge that the status reports they send up the chain paint a rosier picture than reality.
So they are not failing quickly to learn. They're just failing slowly and expensively because no one wants to be the executive who admits the high-profile AI integration is a total dud.
Exactly. And the mechanics of how that happens in a standard corporate hierarchy make a lot of sense if you think about it.
How so?
With traditional software, say you're rolling out a new database or an ERP system, the success metrics are binary. Does the system log the transaction? Yes or no?
Right. It works or it crashes.
But AI, especially generative AI, is probabilistic. When an AI pilot isn't working, it doesn't usually crash with an error code.
It just gives slightly mediocre, hallucinated, or, unhelpful results.
Yes. So the engineering teams think, well, if we just tweak the system prompt or if we just fine-tune it on a bit more data, it'll work.
And that process of endless tweaking can burn through millions of pounds without ever crossing the threshold of actual utility.
That probabilistic nature is exactly why the governance frameworks are breaking down. And the lack of oversight is just alarming.
Did they not track this at the board level?
Barely. Only 7% of these leaders say that every AI program is formally tracked and reported to the board.
7%. That's nothing.
In the U.S., for comparison, it's 20%, which is still remarkably low for a technology that is supposedly reshaping the global economy, but it's nearly 3 times better than the UK.
It means boards are approving these massive AI budgets based on pure fear of missing out, but they have zero visibility into the actual deployment outcomes.
Right. It creates a governance black hole where capital goes in, but accountability just doesn't come out.
And that dynamic in the boardroom, the pressure to adopt AI, combined with a complete lack of understanding of how to measure it, that's bleeding straight into the workforce.
Oh, entirely.
We have a study here commissioned by Google and run by Public First that shows 73% of UK workplaces are now using AI in some capacity.
73%.
Which is a massive jump from 34% just a year ago.
Yeah, on the surface, that looks like a total triumph of adoption.
It does. But the study segments the workforce, and it reveals a massive disparity. The tangible career rewards, the promotions, the significant pay rises, the faster progression tracks are being almost entirely hoarded by a 15% minority of workers they classify as trailblazers.
The trailblazer divide is such a critical phenomenon to look at right now. It exposes the difference between having access to a tool and having the structural understanding of how to actually leverage it.
Right, because for the vast majority of that 73%, AI adoption is super shallow.
Exactly. They're using advanced large language models like a slightly better Google search bar. They ask it a question, get an answer, and move on.
Whereas the 15%, these trailblazers, they are entirely re-engineering their workflows.
Yeah, they're using AI to write scripts that automate their inbox, to synthesize complex data sets, to draft reports in a fraction of the time.
So they're treating the AI as a reasoning engine, not just a lookup tool.
Right, and because access is widespread, but actual strategic guidance is almost non-existent, that 15% just pulls away from the pack.
The company gets a localized productivity boost from a few power users, while the broader workforce just feels this escalating sense of anxiety.
Which is a very real anxiety.
Oh, absolutely. We see that anxiety quantified in a study from Engineers Ireland. They estimate that 110,000 Irish jobs are highly vulnerable to automation, representing about 7% of their workforce.
And crucially, this isn't physical labor on an assembly line.
No, they are talking about clerical work, administration, and even high-tech roles. The fear of replacement is just immense.
Yet the fear is drastically outpacing the macroeconomic evidence of actual job replacement or even widespread productivity gains.
Wait, really? The fear is worse than the reality.
Oh, definitely. The Engineers Ireland report cites a massive study from MIT showing that 95% of organizations reported zero gains from their AI pilots.
95%. That's almost everyone.
Let that sink in. 95%. Another study from the U.S. National Bureau of Economic Research surveyed executives and found that 69% saw little to no impact from AI.
Wow.
With employee usage averaging just an hour and a half a week.
So you have a workforce that's completely terrified of an imminent AI takeover, operating within organizations that can't even figure out how to get a measurable return on investment from a basic chatbot.
That contradiction is the defining feature of this moment, I think. People are looking over their shoulders at a technology that, statistically speaking, is stalling out in the pilot phase.
Right. But, if you're a mid-sized UK enterprise struggling to get ROI from your AI integration, you really shouldn't feel too bad.
Why is that?
Because the absolute bleeding edge of the tech industry is openly admitting how hard this is. Mark Zuckerberg's recently leaked town hall with Meta staff is a perfect example of this.
Oh, that tape was fascinating.
Right. He was incredibly candid, admitting that their internal AI agents just haven't accelerated in development over the last 4 months the way leadership expected them to.
It's rare to see that level of candor from a Frontier Lab CEO, honestly. Especially when you consider the sheer volume of resources Meta is throwing at the problem.
How much are they spending?
They are projected to spend up to $145 billion on AI infrastructure this year alone.
$145 billion? That's astronomical.
Right. And they executed a massive restructuring,
cutting 10% of their staff and reallocating 7,000 engineers specifically onto AI teams.
Which understandably took a heavy toll on internal morale, I'm sure.
Yeah, and despite deploying the most advanced compute clusters on the planet and hiring top-tier machine learning talent, Zuckerberg is acknowledging that autonomous agentic systems are vastly harder to operationalize than the marketing materials suggest.
So if the company dropping $145 billion on infrastructure and hoarding thousands of H100 GPUs can't get their AI agents to reliably execute complex tasks, the local logistics company struggling to get a customer service bot to stop hallucinating their return policy really needs to give themselves a break.
Exactly. The ceiling on reliability right now is a universal problem.
And this realization that the models are impressive in a sandbox but brittle in production is forcing a massive pivot in how AI is actually sold, right?
Yeah, we are seeing a complete shift in the vendor business model.
Microsoft is launching a $2.5 billion unit they call the Frontier Company, and AWS is committing $1 billion to create a massive division of forward deployed engineers.
The AWS move is particularly revealing, I think. They want thousands of staff in this new unit, even as Amazon has been aggressively cutting tens of thousands of corporate jobs in other divisions.
Right, so why hire there?
The hyperscalers have realized that the barrier to enterprise AI revenue is no longer the capability of the underlying model. The barrier is the last mile of integration.
Meaning?
You can give an enterprise access to the most powerful API in the world, but if their internal data is siloed, messy, and unstructured, the model is useless.
So what's AWS doing about it?
AWS is literally planning to send pods of highly paid engineers to sit with corporate customers for 45-day stints just to write the production code necessary to get the AI working within the client's specific environment.
It is exactly like selling someone a ridiculously complex high-end IKEA wardrobe.
Huh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. You drop off the flat pack boxes, take their money, and drive away. But a month later, you look at the usage data and realize the customer hasn't opened the doors once.
Because they couldn't read the instructions.
Exactly. The pieces didn't fit the uneven floor of their house. So instead of just selling the flat pack, the vendors are realizing they have to send a master carpenter to the customer's house to physically build the wardrobe, integrate it into the room, and show them how to use the handles.
Because if they don't, the customer is going to renew their subscription next year.
And that ties directly back to that 67 billion pound waste figure from Amern. The major vendors are acutely aware of the high failure rates of these AI pilots.
They know that sunk cost tolerance has a limit. Eventually, boards will demand to see the ROI.
And if the systems aren't functioning, the software as a service contracts will be canceled.
Right. By sending in forward-deployed engineers, AWS and Microsoft are taking on the execution risk themselves. They are admitting that the technology is not yet plug-and-play for the average IT department.
Meanwhile, despite all this execution chaos on the ground, the macro funding environment is still operating in a state of absolute frenzy.
Oh, completely.
The British Business Bank data shows that AI firms to a record 44% of all UK small business equity funding last year.
Nearly half.
Nearly half of all startup capital in the country went to AI. But at the same time, overall funding actually fell by 4%.
It's a classic funding barbell. We are seeing an intense concentration of capital. Investors are rushing into AI applications and foundation models, effectively starving other sectors.
Right. Seed stage funding and university spinouts, the traditional engines of long-term tech innovation in the UK, saw their funding drop by 33%.
The market is aggressively reorganizing itself around this single technological bet.
But as we've explored with the deployment struggles and the massive corporate waste, a significant portion of that concentrated capital is leaking out during the execution phase.
Which brings up a huge point. The friction between the massive influx of capital and the inability to deploy it effectively raises a huge question about the macroeconomics of this boom.
Like, how is all this actually being paid for at the foundational level?
Exactly. Because when you look at the balance sheets of the hyperscalers, the companies actually building the data centers and buying the chips, the bed engine, powering this, is operating on a scale that is genuinely difficult to comprehend.
Give me some numbers.
Amazon and Alphabet alone have raised roughly $60 billion in debt over the past year across multiple global currencies. We are talking sterling, euros, yen.
The debt structuring is becoming incredibly complex. Alphabet even sold a 100-year bond.
A 100-year bond for tech.
Right. Bankers are getting highly creative, tying the issuance of debt directly to pre-agreed data center leases.
So they are financializing the physical infrastructure of AI to an unprecedented degree.
Yes, and the estimated capital expenditure for the hyperscalers is projected to hit $725 billion by 2026.
$725 billion.
Consequently, global AI-related debt is pushing toward a record $2 trillion.
Issuing a 100-year bond for a technology space where the fundamental architecture changes every 4 to 6 months is an astonishing level of financial confidence.
Or perhaps hubris.
Yeah, maybe hubris.
Yeah.
And this massive debt load directly tethers domestic UK investors, pension funds, and institutional capital to the ultimate returns of what is primarily an American-led infrastructure build-out.
So if the deployment phase stalls longer than anticipated, or if the enterprise ROI continues to hover near zero for the majority of companies, that $2 trillion debt mountain becomes a systemic vulnerability.
And the financial weight of the infrastructure build is colliding hard with physical reality, particularly here in the UK. Well, the government and regional authorities are constantly announcing these massive AI growth zones and state-of-the-art tech hubs. The press releases paint a picture of a seamless, hypermodern, silicon-driven future.
Sure, they always do.
But when you examine the logistical and physical details of these projects, the gap between the announcement and the reality is immense. Many of these flagship projects are, for all practical purposes, phantoms.
Phantoms. Okay, the Stargate UK site in North Tyneside is the perfect case study of this phantom infrastructure.
Right, Stargate UK.
It was pitched to the public and the media as a monumental US-UK technology partnership headlined by a £30 billion investment.
It sounded like the UK was securing its place at the absolute center of the global AI compute network.
It really did. But Freedom of Information requests pulled back the curtain, and the internal documents show a vastly different reality.
What did they find?
OpenAI and their compute partner, Niscale, didn't even have recorded formal meetings with the local authorities before the massive launch announcement was made.
The financial framing of that announcement was heavily engineered.
Yeah.
Of that touted £30 billion, $10 billion was earmarked for an entirely separate project.
And the rest.
The remaining $20 billion wasn't committed capital at all. It was a hypothetical projection of the total investment the site would theoretically need over a decade to reach its maximum proposed capacity.
So it was essentially an announcement in search of a viable project, a speculative flag planted in the ground.
Exactly. And predictably, OpenAI has now paused the development, citing regulatory hurdles and, crucially, energy costs.
Energy. Energy is the immovable object in all of this. You see the exact same dynamic with the proposed Lanarkshire data center in Scotland.
Right.
This was an £8.2 billion project, and the key selling point, the thing that made it sound acceptable from a sustainability standpoint, was the promise that it would run entirely on-site renewable energy by 2030.
Sounds great on paper.
But when investigative journalists at The Guardian actually ran the math on that claim, the physics simply did not add up.
The math on data center power consumption is brutal. To power a facility of that scale entirely off-grid using renewables, you would need roughly 400 megawatts of solar and 800 megawatts of wind generation.
Which means what? Physically?
Constructing that would require building the equivalent of the UK's largest onshore wind farm from scratch in under 4 years.
That's just not happening.
No. And furthermore, the physical footprint required for that density of wind turbines is vastly larger than the plot of land they actually secured. The on-site renewable claim was a mathematical impossibility from day one.
So the inevitable reality is that this massive facility will have to pull its power from the national grid, which brings us to the ultimate bottleneck.
The grid.
A recent Capgemini report surveyed energy sector executives, and 77% of them fear that AI power demand is going to fundamentally outstrip their supply capacity.
The UK national grid connection queue is infamous right now.
How bad is it?
New projects are routinely being quoted an 8 to 10 year wait just to get physically connected to the transmission network.
8 to 10 years. And that queue is being artificially inflated by the very speculative frenzy we are discussing.
All right, the phantom requests.
Up to a fifth of the power connection requests currently sitting in that queue are classified as phantoms. These are developers lodging speculative requests for massive grid connections on sites where they have no immediate plans, or sometimes even the capital, to build.
They are hoarding capacity in the queue as a tradable asset, which completely clogs the system and delays legitimate infrastructure projects that are actually ready to break ground.
This presents a massive strategic paradox for the UK, right? If our domestic grid is this thoroughly clogged, with 10-year wait times and artificial phantom bottlenecks, and our energy costs remain structurally higher than other regions, how on earth is British industry supposed to compete globally in the AI space?
It's a huge problem.
Because the compute has to live somewhere. If we can't build it here, what happens to the capital?
The capital follows the path of least physical resistance, and we are seeing that happen right now at the institutional level.
Like with the national grid.
Exactly. Look at the recent moves by the national grid itself. They just placed a £1.4 billion investment into a company called Geelong.
Geelong.
Yeah, Geelong is a U.S.-based energy platform specifically focused on building power infrastructure for AI data centers.
Okay, so what's the catch?
The irony here is profound, that national grid investment is directly helping to fund a massive 2.67 gigawatt gas plant located in West Texas, explicitly designed to supply power to a Microsoft data center campus.
That is a staggering dynamic. The British National Grid, the entity responsible for our domestic power transmission, is taking British capital and deploying it into Texas to build a gas plant to power American AI infrastructure.
It is the ultimate admission of domestic physical constraint.
The capital is fleeing the regulatory and grid bottlenecks of the UK to find deliverable, growth-oriented energy projects abroad, where they can secure guaranteed 20-year contracts with hyperscalers.
It is incredibly frustrating for UK firms trying to build domestic capability, but financially it is a highly rational move for the national grid.
Yeah, I guess it is.
It highlights a critical truth about the current phase of AI. The most reliable returns right now aren't in software. They are in heavy, unglamorous infrastructure.
Right.
And if we look at where AI is actually delivering on its promises of efficiency, we have to look past the chatbots and the generative text and focus on the heavy industry sectors.
Like the oil and gas sector.
Exactly. The industrial Internet of Things market is forecast to reach over $550 billion by 2029.
And the deployment in those heavy industries looks entirely different than what we see in the enterprise software space.
Very different.
They aren't trying to deploy open-ended agentic models to write emails. They are utilizing highly specific AI models for predictive maintenance.
They deploy networks of real-time sensors across remote drilling wells and pipeline infrastructure, feeding that data into AI-driven digital twins.
Digital twins. Okay, how does that work?
The AI is running continuous simulations on the digital twin to predict physical faults before they happen.
Like finding a leak before it starts.
Yeah, it analyzes vibration data, temperature fluctuations, and pressure metrics to say, hey, this specific valve is going to fail in 48 hours.
That allows them to schedule targeted maintenance rather than reacting to a catastrophic failure.
Exactly. It is highly specific, narrow AI applied to highly measurable physical outcomes. The ROI is immediate and undeniable. You prevented a pipeline leak.
It lacks the sci-fi glamour of a conversational AI, but it is the blueprint for actual deliverable value in the physical world.
Yeah, but while the physical infrastructure struggles to catch up, the economics of how software developers actually consume these AI models is undergoing a massive shift too.
Oh, definitely. For the past 2 years, the default strategy for companies integrating AI was a concept known as token maxing.
Token maxing, right.
The philosophy was essentially brute force. You buy access to the largest, most expensive, most mathematically capable frontier model available like GPT-4 or Claude Opus, and you route every single query, no matter how trivial, through that massive model.
The assumption was that maximum compute equaled maximum productivity.
Exactly. But token maxing was a product of the announcement phase hype, where capability was the only metric anyone cared about.
But as we move into deployment, the unit economics are suddenly biting back hard. The models charged by the token, essentially pieces of words, and when you deploy these tools at a corporate scale, the token burn rate is astronomical.
The Uber example is the perfect illustration of this collision with unit economics.
What happened with Uber?
Reports surfaced that Uber's engineering teams burned through their entire allocated AI budget for the year 2026 in just 4 months.
4 months?
They rolled out AI coding assistants to their staff, and because the tools work by constantly scanning the developer's environment and suggesting code completions with every keystroke, the usage-based pricing models just silently chewed through tens of millions of dollars in API calls.
It forces a brutal reckoning. Gartner is now projecting that if current consumption trends continue, the sheer cost of AI coding API calls will actually overtake the average developer's base salary by 2028.
Wait, you are essentially paying more for the autocomplete than you are for the human engineer.
Yes. That is a completely unsustainable cost structure for any business, regardless of size. When the meter starts to bite that aggressively, corporate behavior changes rapidly. Developers are forced to find cheaper alternatives.
And this is where the technological race intersects with a massive geopolitical shift. The U.S. frontier labs have dominated the capability benchmarks, but now they are facing severe price pressure from international competitors.
The Chinese models, for instance.
Exactly. A Chinese AI lab called Z.AI recently released a model called GLM 5.2. Independent benchmarks are showing that it performs astonishingly close to the level of Anthropic's flagship model, Claude Opus.
But the price is the kicker.
Right. Here is the critical detail. It is priced at roughly 1/6 of the cost of the American equivalent.
The industry is calling this a mini DeepSeek moment. The capability gap between the heavily funded U.S. labs and the international, particularly Chinese, open-source community is narrowing at an alarming rate.
It has gone from a multi-year advantage to a gap of just a few months.
And the developer community is highly responsive to this price compression. We can see this in the data from OpenRouter, which is a major marketplace where developers buy API access to various models.
What does the data show?
Over the course of just 6 months, the usage of open source and alternative models on their platform jumped from 34% to 65%.
Developers are building routing layers into their software now. If a user asks the app to summarize a simple paragraph, the system routes that task to a cheap open-source model that costs fractions of a cent.
Right. It only queries the massive, expensive U.S. frontier models for highly complex reasoning tasks.
This behavioral shift is absolutely terrifying the American labs. You can see the panic in their pricing strategy.
Yeah, Anthropic recently had to release Claude Sonnet 5, their mid-tier model, and aggressively push the price of its agentic capabilities down to just $2 per million tokens.
They are actively bleeding API revenue and are being forced to compete on pure cost, not just raw intelligence.
The commoditization of the model layer is happening much faster than the hyperscalers anticipated.
Yeah.
However, the shift toward these cheaper international models carries a massive caveat for enterprise buyers.
Because cost is no longer the only variable.
Exactly. There is now a significant geopolitical trust tax applied to these systems. The integration of foreign models into domestic corporate workflows introduces severe security and compliance vulnerabilities.
The incident with Alibaba perfectly highlights this paranoia. It sounds like something out of a corporate espionage thriller.
It really does.
Alibaba had to issue an internal ban prohibiting its own engineering staff from using Anthropic's Claude Code tool.
And why was that?
Alibaba developers discovered that the Claude software was secretly executing code in the background to check the system time zones and the proxy routing information of the users. It was actively trying to identify if the developers were accessing the system from mainland China.
Anthropic defended the practice, categorizing it as a security experiment. Their stated goal was to prevent abuse and guard against a practice called model distillation.
What's model distillation?
It's where a company uses the output of a highly advanced model like Claude to train a cheaper domestic competitor model. Anthropic suspected Chinese firms of doing exactly this, and they were implementing aggressive, opaque telemetry to identify and block them.
The technical mechanics of that are what make it so alarming. The LLM isn't just generating text, it's executing scripts on the user's local machine to analyze their network configuration.
Right, without telling them.
If you are a European or UK enterprise, observing a US AI lab covertly scanning the hardware environments of its users to enforce geopolitical embargoes is a massive red flag for data sovereignty.
It means the tool you are integrating into your codebase is acting as an active compliance monitor for a foreign government.
This deep geopolitical mistrust is driving behavior at every level of the AI stack, right down to the silicon.
The massive reliance on NVIDIA for the physical GPUs that train and run these models is making everyone, including the frontier labs themselves, incredibly nervous.
They are desperate to escape the monopoly pricing and the potential for supply chain weaponization.
And the hardware scramble is intensifying. We are seeing reports that Anthropic is in deep negotiations with Samsung to develop custom AI inference chips.
And OpenAI just announced the launch of their own custom silicon, codenamed Jalapeno, developed in partnership with Broadcom.
The labs that build the software are now realizing they have to vertically integrate and control the physical hardware layer to protect their margins.
And achieve silicon independence from NVIDIA, and by extension, the geopolitical bottlenecks of Taiwanese manufacturing.
For a UK chief information officer or a government department trying to build a digital strategy, this entire landscape presents a critical sovereignty question.
You are caught in the crossfire of US-China trade wars, labs building proprietary silicon and unpredictable telemetry sweeps.
The foundational question is, how exposed is your core business infrastructure to the shifting security calculus of Washington?
We have seen exactly how volatile that calculus can be. Look at the recent regulatory whiplash regarding Anthropic's Fable 5 model.
Oh, yeah.
The U.S. Commerce Department abruptly slapped export controls on the model, classifying it as a dual-use technology with national security implications. Anyone outside the approved zones suddenly lost access.
And then what happened?
Then, just weeks later, they reversed course and lifted the controls. If your enterprise software was relying on that specific model API, your product was essentially bricked and then magically unbricked, entirely at the whim of bureaucratic maneuvering in Washington.
That incident empirically proves how quickly and arbitrarily a foreign government can cut off your access to fundamental compute resources.
And the geopolitical entanglements are only getting more complex.
OpenAI is currently floating a proposal to grant the U.S. government a 5% equity stake in the company.
5%.
Yes, the concept is to create a quasi-sovereign wealth structure for AI development, explicitly aligning the lab's financial success with American national interests.
The downstream implications of that are profound. If the U.S. government part-owns OpenAI and has a vested stake in its dominance, how can any European buyer, whether it's a multinational bank, a defense contractor, or a national health service, trust the neutrality of that system?
Can you legally or ethically pipe your citizens' sensitive data into a cloud architecture that is partially owned and directed by the American state apparatus?
The short answer for many compliance departments will be no. The structural risk is just too high.
This realization is finally driving demand for localized sovereign solutions within the UK. We are beginning to see investments aimed at decoupling from the American-led ecosystem.
Like MSAR.
A prime example is MSAI, yeah. They just signed a £50 million deal to build out dedicated AI infrastructure in Scotland. Their entire value proposition isn't about having the absolute smartest model, it is legal and geographical isolation.
By keeping the physical servers and the data processing strictly within British legal borders, they provide a compliant pathway for organizations to legally sidestep the jurisdictional reach of the U.S. Cloud Act.
We are also seeing UK startups trying to solve the sovereignty issue further upstream, at the data layer.
Yes, a Cambridge-based startup called World Model Data recently raised £7 million for a fascinating approach to training data.
What's their approach?
Well, the major U.S. labs train their models by aggressively scraping the entire open web, which is fraught with copyright infringement, bias, and toxic content. World Model Data is taking a completely different route.
Okay.
They are using licensed, highly controlled video game data gameplay from engines like Unreal and Unity to train physical AI systems.
So they are generating clean synthetic data sets that teach the AI how physics and spatial environments work, without touching the messy, legally compromised data of the internet.
It's a rare example of a UK company carving out a strategic niche right at the source of the AI supply chain.
It is a deliberate strategy to regain control over the provenance of the system. Whether a company is investing in physical Scottish data centers or purely synthetic training data, the underlying motivation is the same.
UK institutions are waking up to the reality that building their operational future on top of an American-controlled AI ecosystem carries unacceptable structural and geopolitical risks.
That tension around data sovereignty and control brings us to perhaps the most complex arena of AI deployment: the public sector.
When we look at corporate enterprise, the driving pressure is ROI and profit margins. But in the public sector, the pressures are entirely different.
Government departments and local councils are facing unprecedented budget deficits and massive backlogs in service delivery. For them, the ultimate currency isn't just money, it's time saved.
AI is being aggressively pitched to them as the silver bullet for efficiency.
The momentum for public sector adoption is staggering because the desperation for efficiency is so high. When a vendor promises to eliminate the administrative burden of civil servants, the institutional appetite to adopt the technology often overrides the standard procurement caution.
We are seeing pilot programs rolled out across highly sensitive areas of public life, and the numbers being published from these public sector pilots are astonishing.
Give us an example.
Lancashire Council recently claimed that by deploying Microsoft Copilot to assist social workers in drafting case notes and summarizing files, they project saving 225,000 hours of labor a year.
Wow.
The Thames Valley Police have deployed an AI assistant they call Bobby, which is currently handling around 200 non-emergency calls a day. They claim it successfully resolves nearly 45% of those calls without requiring a human operator, while simultaneously flagging high harm cases for immediate escalation.
The National Health Service is arguably the most aggressive adopter. They are currently navigating a £10 billion technological overhaul.
A significant portion of that budget is prioritizing AI-driven triage tools integrated directly into the NHS app, alongside ambient voice note-taking systems for physicians.
The ambient voice tech listens to the consultation and automatically formats the medical record. Early internal pilots suggest this could save a doctor up to 47 minutes per shift in sheer administrative typing.
If you take those numbers at face value, they sound miraculous, giving social workers, doctors, and police officers that much time back to focus on actual human care is the dream of modern government.
However, we have to look at these claims through that exact same lens of muddy waters we applied to the enterprise space.
Right. The critical caveat that must be applied to every single one of these miraculous statistics is the source of the data. The 225,000 hours saved, the 47 minutes a shift. These metrics are almost universally vendor-published projections or extrapolations from very small, highly controlled early pilots.
They are not the result of independent, long-term, peer-reviewed audits of actual organizational savings.
Which forces us to ask the terrifying question. What happens when the AI deployed in these high-stakes environments inevitably gets it wrong?
Because the technology's failure mode is incredibly deceptive.
Yeah.
To understand how these models fail, we have to look at a brilliant investigation conducted by the Consumer Group, which into TripAdvisor's new AI review summaries.
It is the perfect low-stakes illustration of a catastrophic reliability flaw.
The which investigation exposed the mechanical reality of the smoothing effect.
The smoothing effect.
Yeah. When you train a large language model using a technique called reinforcement learning from human feedback, or RLHF, you are essentially paying human testers to grade the AI's responses.
And the human graders consistently penalize the model for language that is aggressive, toxic, dramatic, or highly controversial.
Over time, the model internalizes this feedback. It mechanically learns that the safest mathematical pathway to a high score is to be unfailingly polite, bland, and to actively avoid extreme language unless it is explicitly, forcefully prompted to include it.
The result is an AI that actively sanitizes reality, which found that TripAdvisor was using AI to summarize hundreds of user reviews for various hotels. In one instance, a hotel was facing active lawsuits and hundreds of furious reviews regarding mass food poisoning.
And what did the AI say?
The AI summary completely omitted the systemic health hazard and summarized the property as spotless. In another case, a resort was inundated with reviews detailing serious sexual harassment claims against the staff. The AI, trained to avoid toxic controversy, smoothed over the allegations and simply described the resort atmosphere as friendly.
The model didn't malfunction in a technical sense. It executed its training perfectly. It took sharp, jagged, negative data and rubbed off the edges until the output was pleasantly useless. It prioritizes the appearance of helpfulness over objective truth.
It is exactly like hiring a painfully polite administrative assistant, the kind of person who is so averse to conflict that they forget to tell you the building is actively on fire because they didn't want to cause a fuss or interrupt your meeting.
The consequences of that smoothing effect in the public sector are profound. If an AI sands the edges off a mass food poisoning incident at a hotel, the cost is a ruined vacation. But what happens when that exact same underlying neural architecture is used by a local council to summarize a social worker's dense, complex case notes about a vulnerable child in a volatile domestic situation?
Or what happens when a police AI assistant politely summarizes a chaotic, emotionally charged emergency call and inadvertently strips out the subtle linguistic cues that indicate coercive control?
The cost of that error is a fundamental failure of public safety. The margin for error is zero, but the tool being deployed is inherently designed to guess the most plausible-sounding next word.
The human oversight, the ability of a stressed social worker to meticulously fact-check the AI's polite summary against the raw data, is going to be the only thing preventing systemic failures.
And there's an additional layer of friction here. The general public, the citizens actually receiving these services, do not actually want to interact with the AI.
That resistance is clearly documented. A recent analysis of Whitehall's digital strategy by the consultancy Baringa revealed a stark disconnect.
What did they find?
They found that the genuine deliverable financial savings in government aren't in citizen-facing chatbots, they are deep in the back office. The real value is in using AI to triage massive data sets, analyze failure demand, and detect systemic fraud patterns.
Yet the political instinct is often to deploy shiny, front-facing AI tools.
But the Baringa data shows that only 14% of the public prefer using AI to human interaction when dealing with government services. A massive 82% explicitly stated that speaking to a human being matters significantly to them in these contexts.
If the government forces cost-saving AI interfaces onto a public that distrusts them, they might actually be actively generating harm and misinformation. We can see this dynamic playing out in the healthcare space.
Oh, the KFF poll.
Yeah, a major poll by KFF in the United States looked at how people use AI chatbots for medical queries. The findings were deeply unsettling.
The data show that individuals who frequently use AI chatbots to seek out health advice are significantly more likely to believe deeply entrenched vaccine myths, such as the entirely debunked link between vaccines and autism, than people who do not use chatbots.
And crucially, that statistical correlation held true even after the researchers controlled for demographics, education levels, and political affiliation.
So it's the chatbot itself causing it.
The mechanism behind this is the AI's inherent tendency to validate the user's premise. If a user approaches a chatbot with a leading question based on a conspiracy theory, the model, attempting to be helpful, will often hallucinate confirming evidence or present a false equivalence between scientific consensus and fringe theories.
It acts as an algorithmic echo chamber that validates pre-existing biases with the authoritative tone of a machine.
The frontier AI labs are acutely aware of this massive reliability gap, especially in high-stakes scientific fields. They know that a polite hallucinating assistant is useless for actual research.
OpenAI recently launched a new evaluation framework called GeneBench Pro. Its entire purpose is to test a model's actual scientific judgment in complex biology, moving beyond simply asking the AI to recall memorized facts.
GeneBench Pro feeds the model messy, contradictory experimental data and grades it on its analytical approach and reasoning.
The results of that benchmark are highly revealing regarding the current limits of the technology. OpenAI's absolute best, most advanced model only scored 28.7% on the GeneBench Pro evaluation.
28.7%. It empirically demonstrates just how difficult true scientific judgment and reasoning remain for these systems.
Anthropic is also attempting to solve this trust deficit. They recently launched the Claude Science Workbench, a tool designed specifically for researchers.
The defining feature of the workbench isn't creative writing. It is focused entirely on generating reproducible and auditable scientific figures. Every piece of data output by the system ships with the exact underlying code and the specific environment state that produced it.
They are essentially trying to build a mathematical paper trail. They recognize that if you are doing drug discovery or epidemiological modeling, you cannot rely on an opaque black box answer. Auditability is rapidly becoming the most critical selling point for enterprise and scientific AI.
So we have spent this deep dive mapping out the chaos across multiple domains. We've seen the £67 billion wasted in corporate enterprise due to governance failures.
We've examined the physical grid bottlenecks and phantom data centers.
We've analyzed the geopolitical supply chain vulnerabilities and the terrifying reliability flaws in public sector deployment.
All of these disparate threads converge on one final critical reality: the desperate, belated scramble by governments and regulators to build guardrails around this technology after it has already been deployed.
We are witnessing the frantic regulation of an arms race.
And the regulators themselves are being refreshingly, if terrifyingly, honest about how far behind they are. Let's look at the financial sector.
Okay.
The Financial Conduct Authority here in the UK just published the Mills Review, and the data it presents is alarming. They found that 11 million UK adults, which is roughly a fifth of the adult population, are currently prepared to allow AI tools to autonomously manage their personal money.
They're willing to let algorithms dictate their savings, their investments, and their borrowing.
And they are doing this in an environment with almost zero specific regulatory cover. If a consumer uses an AI chatbot that hallucinates a terrible piece of investment advice, or auto-allocates their portfolio into a high-risk asset that crashes, there is currently no established regulatory framework or specific compensation scheme to protect them.
The technology has bypassed the traditional financial advisory laws. Sheldon Mills, the director at the FCA, literally described the situation as an arms race for regulators just to keep pace with the speed of technological adoption.
The FCA is now openly discussing the need to bring the fundamental model providers themselves, companies like Anthropic and OpenAI, under direct regulatory oversight, classifying them as critical third parties to the financial system.
But the anxiety isn't limited to retail consumers getting bad advice. At the highest institutional level, the fear is systemic collapse. The Bank of England is increasingly vocal about the macroeconomic risks.
Sarah Breeden, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, recently floated a concept that illustrates the severity of the threat.
She publicly discussed the potential necessity of implementing a market-wide kill switch specifically designed for agentic AI trading systems.
A market-wide kill switch. The imagery of the central bank needing a giant red button to stop the algorithms is just wild. But how exactly would AI cause a systemic crash that requires that level of intervention? We already have algorithmic high-frequency trading. How are these new AI agents different?
Well, traditional algorithmic trading executes specific, pre-programmed mathematical strategies like arbitrage or momentum trading based on immediate price triggers.
Right.
Agentic AI is fundamentally different. These are large language models given agency to read live news feeds, interpret the nuanced sentiment of central bank speeches, synthesize global geopolitical events, and then autonomously execute complex, multi-step trading strategies based on their interpretation of that unstructured data.
And the Bank of England's specific fear is the risk of correlated behavior.
Because all these different banks might be building their proprietary trading agents on top of the exact same underlying base models like GPT-4.
Precisely. If 50 different institutional trading desks are all using agents derived from similar foundation models, those agents might all interpret a specific, unexpected news event in the exact same flawed way. The correlation risk is massive.
If a geopolitical event occurs and hundreds of autonomous agents all simultaneously decide the optimal strategy is to dump a specific class of sovereign bonds, the sheer speed and volume of that correlated action could trigger a catastrophic flash crash before any human risk manager even understands what the news event was.
The legacy financial rulebooks were built to manage human panic. They are entirely unequipped to handle instantaneous correlated algorithmic panic.
That fear of the technology moving faster than our ability to control it is echoing at the highest levels of global governance.
Yeah, the United Nations recently convened their first independent scientific panel specifically focused on AI, co-chaired by Yoshua Bengio, one of the foundational pioneers of deep learning.
The language they used in their report did not mince words.
Bengio's statement was stark and unequivocal. He stated on the record that there is currently no scientific guarantee that increasingly capable autonomous AI systems will not cause catastrophic harm to society.
He is pointing out a fundamental truth. The engineering ability to scale the size and capability of these models is drastically outpacing the scientific understanding of how to align, interpret, or definitively control them.
The political rhetoric is escalating to match the scientific warnings. Yvette Cooper, the UK Foreign Secretary, recently made a deeply provocative historical comparison.
What'd you say?
She compared the current lack of binding global AI governance rules to the international climate immediately preceding the atomic bombing of Hiroshima.
Wow.
She is forcefully arguing that the international community cannot afford to wait for a catastrophic systemic failure, whether in financial markets, biosecurity, or infrastructure, before establishing a rigid regulatory framework.
We are seeing this urgency translate into specific targeted demands across different verticals of society.
Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, brought the abstract threat down to a very visceral human level. He is aggressively demanding the creation of an international AI child safety pledge.
His argument highlights a glaring regulatory hypocrisy.
How so?
Modern society rigorously, chemically, and physically tests every single plastic toy before it is legally allowed to reach a child's hands. Yet, we are currently allowing children to interact for hours a day with highly persuasive, unpredictable AI chatbots that have undergone virtually zero specific pediatric psychological testing.
That UN pressure ties perfectly into immediate domestic action. The UK government has just launched a formal call for evidence regarding toy safety regulations, and they are explicitly focusing the inquiry on the integration of AI capabilities into internet-connected toys.
The regulatory gaze is finally turning toward the toy box. But when we look at how children are actually interacting with AI, the classroom is arguably the most volatile environment.
Education is perhaps the clearest example of deployment completely outpacing strategy. A recent comprehensive study by Teach first surveyed English school leaders.
What did they find?
They found that 60% of school leaders acknowledge that generative AI is actively being used within their institutions by staff or students.
Okay, that's high.
However, a staggering statistic accompanies that. Only 2% of those schools have actually developed and implemented a formal, comprehensive strategy for how the technology should be governed, utilized, or restricted.
2%. It is the absolute Wild West in the educational sector. The technology has flooded the environment, and the institutions are paralyzed.
And the regulators responsible for the integrity of that system are openly panicking. Ian Baucom, the head of Ulfqual, the exam regulator, recently issued a severe warning regarding the massive level of scrutiny that will be required for the coursework components of the new V-level qualifications.
He is trying to combat what he explicitly termed AI-fueled subversion.
Baucom is acknowledging a dual threat. He is warning that relying on AI to mark and grade student work introduces unacceptable levels of bias and hallucination into the assessment process.
But more existentially, he is warning that traditional coursework itself might no longer be a viable method of assessment if the educational system cannot reliably prove that the submitted work represents genuine human endeavor rather than prompted AI generation.
The foundational integrity of the national assessment system is buckling under the strain of ubiquitous generative tools.
So we have a landscape where the central bank fears flash crashes, the UN warns of catastrophic harm, and the exam boards fear the death of coursework.
Everyone in a position of authority is terrified. So what is the actual mechanical response from the state?
Here in the UK, we see the formation of entities like the new Government Digital Service Responsible AI panel in Whitehall, which is being chaired by Jenny Tennyson.
The GDS panel is an attempt to create a proactive framework. They are defining responsible AI quite broadly, focusing not just on technical safety, but on value for the taxpayer, data security, and democratic legitimacy.
Their mandate is to advise government departments and review proposed public sector AI projects before they're pushed live, attempting to introduce a layer of strategic friction into the deployment rush.
But looking at the speed of the technology, I have to question the efficacy of this approach. Are advisory panels, ethical frameworks, and voluntary standards really going to be enough?
Probably not.
Let's look at what is happening right now in the cybersecurity space. Apple, a company famous for its rigid, bundled, infrequent software update schedule, is currently having to drastically speed up the release of their iOS security patches.
Why?
Because hackers and state-sponsored actors are using generative AI to write exploits, identify vulnerabilities, and build malicious tools vastly faster than human security teams can historically respond. If the offensive capabilities are moving at the speed of automated AI generation, how can a bureaucratic government advisory panel possibly keep pace?
It is a highly valid challenge, and it cuts to the core of the regulatory dilemma. The current global paradigm is heavily reliant on voluntary compliance.
In the U.S., they are nearing an agreement on voluntary standards for model releases, where labs agree to certain safety benchmarks and testing timelines. But the operative word is voluntary.
Because hard legislation moves slower than software development, the actual day-to-day burden of safety, of data governance, and of deciding when to hit the brakes on a dangerous or failing system falls almost entirely on the individual businesses, the IT departments, and the government agencies that are deploying the tech.
Which brings the entire narrative full circle. It brings us right back to that initial emerged statistic, £67 billion wasted in the UK corporate sector.
Why? Because in a culture driven by FOMO and governed by voluntary standards, nobody wanted to take the responsibility of hitting the brakes.
The cycle connects perfectly. The macroeconomic hype drives the corporate mandate to deploy.
The deployment hits the physical constraints of the grid and the technical constraints of the models.
The probabilistic failure of the tools leads to the sunk cost fallacy, which breeds the candor gap.
The capital burns, the governance fails, and the geopolitical and regulatory risks multiply in the background.
It is time to synthesize everything we have unpacked today. The defining narrative of artificial intelligence has fundamentally shifted. We are no longer living in the look at this magic trick phase. We are no longer just marveling at a chatbot writing a poem.
We are now deep in the grueling trenches of deployment.
The questions are brutal and practical. How do we physically power this without breaking the grid? How do we govern the data without violating sovereignty? And how do we actually restructure our workflows to make this profitably efficient rather than just an expensive autocomplete?
The crucial takeaway for any leader navigating this space is to recognize where the battle is being fought.
The gap between the euphoric press releases, the phantom data centers, the miracle public sector pilots, and the gritty, complex reality of grid constraints, spiraling API costs, and failed corporate integrations is exactly where businesses are going to win or lose over the next 24 months.
The diagnostic landscape is murky, and you have to interpret the messy reality yourself, ignoring the vendor hype.
And that leads to a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you look at your own organization's AI strategy. As these autonomous agents begin to arrive in enterprise software, and as the marketing hype cycle inevitably spins even faster to justify the massive capital expenditure, the most valuable skill for your business over the next year might not be technical at all.
It might not be knowing how to architect a perfect prompt or engineering a workflow to use a model that is a fraction of a cent cheaper.
If the competitive advantage isn't technical proficiency, what is it?
It might simply be having the institutional courage to hit the kill switch.
The ability to look objectively at a failing pilot, recognize the sunk cost fallacy for what it is, and cancel the project before it silently drains your budget and demoralizes your workforce.
In an era of boundless technological hype, rigorous, unsentimental cancellation discipline is the new innovation. Courage to hit the kill switch, a necessary antidote to the £67 billion black hole. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take these insights, take that necessary skepticism, and apply it directly to your next strategic meeting. We'll see you next time.